because of Ottawa Transit life and things like that. They can watch it. It will be recorded to our YouTube channel, so it will actually stay there. So if you forget who you are and where you are, you can always check that later. You can go back in history to our past meetups that we've recorded, so they'll be there. And yes, you are being watched. There are cameras in this room. If you have any questions about OWASP Ottawa, you can reach out to myself. My name's Garth. I'm one of the chapter leads. Mel is the other chapter leads. There are other, if you're a volunteer, please raise your hand. So yes, you are surrounded. So if you have any questions about the chapter, we meet monthly. We try to be the third Wednesday of every month. We have a hiatus in December just because life is too busy then. We have a Slack channel, so if there are cards over where the stickers are that has all our social media, how to get to our website, that one is the Slack invite. And if you go to owasp.org/Ottawa, you will find everything about us there. So I can show the slide for that, but it's really very simple, just owasp.org/Ottawa. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce this month's speaker. So Chris and I used to work at the same place for quite some time, but I'm not sure if you actually knew me then or...
I think I sent bugs your way.
Yeah, you probably, you were probably causing some sort of mayhem.
Ruckus.
Ruckus. So Chris is a pen testing lead, privacy advocate, and to the chagrin of his wife, an avid homelabber. You have over 20 years of experience in roles from system and network administration to software development to pen testing. And you've worked on all facets of app development, deployment, and use with a lifelong passion for security. You're in the right place then. He's also a volunteer at OWASP Ottawa. And continuing on, you are a jack of all trades.
Yes.
So we won't call you Jack then. So focusing on pen testing and pen testing education, for which, and good on you for development coordinator for CyberSCI CTF. Who has heard of CyberSCI CTF? A few people. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that as well.
I'll do that at the end of my presentation if people are interested.
All right, and you're here to talk to us about fun with APIs.
Yes, a specific API. All right.
Got it.
All right. Hi, everybody. You can hear me okay? All right. So my name is Chris, as Garth. Oh, got to turn that on. As Garth introduced. I'm not going to go over this again. He just sort of covered it all. So this is sort of the procedure of the presentation that I'm going to give you guys. I gave this talk at NorthSec earlier this year in May. However, that was a little abbreviated due to the time constraints I had to work with. So now I'm going to torture you guys for an hour. So we're going to start by sort of telling the story of what happened. This is something that came up during the course of my day job pen testing. And then we're going to sort of walk through some things around that kind of vulnerability. At its core, it's basically just an injection vulnerability. It doesn't seem like anything special, but you can do fun stuff with it. And the more important part of this is I want everyone here who is in software development and project management, when you guys are going to go implement your own API, I want you to think about how A, the documentation is, and B, how security controls around that API work. Okay, that's my goal. If 2 of you do that, I'll consider this a success. So we're going to start here. So we have a development team needed to add some accessibility features. So you can think of this as like, if you've ever logged into anywhere that does SMS or phone 2FA, so that it can call someone and say, hey, here's your two-factor authentication code. They needed to add that functionality to an application that already existed. It wasn't exactly that, but it's close enough of a parallel that it works for the purposes of this. And, as you do, the developer who was sort of charged with kicking the feature off went and built a POC, and then basically integrated it with a third-party, very popular SaaS offering. And because of something in their documentation, that went a little wrong. And this particular rule is something in my years of doing many things I have found to be very true. To tell a little side story about this, there was one time where I was working, I was basically contracted to do some system administration work and network admin work at this small company. And they had a telco room, but they had kind of had a bad relationship with the last company. So they just sort of like fired them without thinking. And what this resulted in is they didn't have any idea what all the equipment in this room was. So it was my job to go in and figure it out. And we mapped out most of the stuff without having to harm anything. And then we got to this one box that had like 8 network cards jacked into it. It wasn't clear what it was. And it turned out they'd bought a server many years ago and temporarily hooked it up instead of getting like professional VoIP services. They were just running this off of something. So we found out when we disconnected it and all the phone system went down. But it was never meant to be a permanent solution. This other company was supposed to have replaced it with a full-on proper like VoIP box. So that was kind of funny. So back to this, that kind of relates to this story a little bit. So the Twilio API, just show of hands, who's familiar with Twilio? Okay, so for those of you who aren't familiar with Twilio, Twilio is a telephony API. So it's a way for you through code to make phone calls to people, play automated voices, play sounds if you want. We'll get to that. And you can do SMS and stuff like that through that. So this was what they were integrating with. Now, just out of curiosity, can anyone see a suspicious line of code here? I don't know how clear that's showing up on the thing, but this is a screenshot from their documentation. I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay. Is there. Everyone see the red arrow right here? So this line of documentation is basically passing in something called TwyML. It's just an XML, it's just markup language that they use specifically to be able to control the flow of a call that's being made outbound. What's interesting is they're just passing it in here as plain text. And show of hands, who here is a Python programmer? Okay. For the rest of you, Python is amazing language. You should try it. But you should also be aware that there's something in it called f-strings. JavaScript has something very similar, which are called template strings, where you can just inject a variable into the middle of a string with no sanitizing, right? Of course. So that was essentially what happened here. We have this problem in the documentation. This is how the documentation is telling you to do it. This is kind of like, to go back here, just to be clear, this is the sample make an outbound call documentation from Twilio. So it's saying, like, this is how you do it. If you take the code off this page, now it's cut off. It actually shows you the full code sample and everything. But this is how a developer might implement their hello world, or did, maybe, or maybe not. So what's funny to me, though, is actually correctly. So you don't have this danger of possibly injecting things or doing weird stuff like that. So if you just want to say like here, call Bill and say, hi, Bill, your account is overdue, you know, you can, that's very easy. I would also like to draw your attention, sorry, wrong side. This right here, if you can see cowbell.mp3, that'll come back later. But that's their sample of like playing an audio file to somebody. And you'll note here that it's pulling from a web URL. It's not, you don't have to upload a resource or anything like that. So I built a very simple demo site that illustrates this problem. This is because I couldn't show any code, obviously, from like an actual product, and this was long fixed. We were testing the product pre-release of this feature, so it's one of those things where like it was fixed, it never went out the door. I can't show proprietary code. not if I want to keep a job. So I built this simple thing to show you, like, you know, two-factor code. You punch in your name. The code's open source. There'll be a link at the end if you want to go and play with it yourself. Really, it's just to emulate and be able to show some code on the screen that actually matches to what's happening with the API. And again, it's not exactly what the other team was doing, but it's very close. It emulates the problem. As Stack Overflow used to be adamant about, simple but complete example. So this is an example of that code. Here you can see we're using an F string that's multi-line, and we're just putting in things, and you'll see full name, and over here, the random authentication code. So full name is basically provided by the user in this case. It's a user's account name. It's this name field right here on this page. So this is, you know, obviously, who here is familiar with injection vulnerabilities? Okay, to the two of you anonymously who didn't put up your hand, basically, if you can control the value of full name, you can basically take over the whole XML document here, which is where the problem is. So what can we do with TwyML? If I can have some shenanigans with the XML, what else can I do with it? Awesome stuff. So you can hijack the entire call. You can get it to do things like stream is a really fun one that lets you open a WebSocket connection to another server and eavesdrop on the call, which is pretty fantastic. Say, play, and gather I also listed here. Those are fun. Say is the sort of text-to-speech. Play is playing the audio, the cowbell example from earlier, and gather is asking for input. And then redirect is really what you care about, because as an attacker, a lot of times, like, a name field is only going to have a certain character limit. You might not be able to get everything you want in one. Redirect lets you do whatever you want as long as you can reach a URL. So here's an example injection. Sorry, I'll step to the side here. But here's an example injection. So we're just going to say our full name is this, /say, redirect, get. I'll talk about the get and post thing in a minute, but and then it's just going to that prox3.xyz is just a host I have for testing. And then it's going to load funstuff.xml. And what it will do is when Twilio is processing this, this is effectively what we're doing. So this on the left is the good case. And on the right, this is going to be the injected case. Now, these are nicely formatted. Obviously, it would just be one long blob. But the idea here is, as soon as it hits this redirect right here, it is going to stop processing every other instruction. So we basically take control of it, and we tell it to load our instructions. And so this is the contents of funstuff.xml. What we're going to do is we're going to say, due to a security event, blah, 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 we need extra verification steps. Then it asks the user for the second four digits of their credit card number on file. Does anybody know why that's a significant, weird thing to ask for?
If you have is it the first or the last digits that you said? But anyway, you can go, and if you have the last digits, a lot of websites will ask you, like, what's your last, like your bank account or something will ask you what's your last 4 digits of a particular card. And then using that, you can get more information about them.
So that's correct. You can do that. Sometimes you can use it for further information lookups. Usually it's the last 4 digits that they'll store. Because they sometimes store the last 4 digits and will ask you for verification, asking someone for the second set of 4 digits as well might trip up a lot of people who aren't really paying attention. And then, so it'll ask them for this. And then you see this gather function call right here. Will send off to yet another XML document. And you'll notice I'm doing everything through gets here. Why is that? I'm lazy. That's why. Every web server logs the full string or the full URL for a get, whereas a post, it's not going to log the post body data unless you configure it to. So I was just like, hey, it's got the option. Let's see what it does. Anything they input, in this case, they're going to input some stuff, hit pound, and then it's going to get sent to my server. And there's some cool sort of info exposure that can happen with this. Now, pretend for a moment that I've created this application and someone else is doing this attack. There's certain things they won't necessarily have access to because this is them connecting to me and I'm connecting to Twilio. There's never any direct communication. So things like account SIDs and no secrets, but there are like numbers that you might call from, or the city that the company is located in that's doing this, that has the software that's using Twilio. And this is kind of what that looks like in the log file. Now it's wrapped. It's a little awkward. I've tried to color highlight things. The really important thing here is the blue, which these are the digits the user enters. And this just shows up in your web server log, right? Now, what's funny though is the account SID is for their Twilio account. You can potentially use that and turn it into phishing Twilio themselves, and maybe getting account access or things like that to that service if you cared about that. And then there's also the numbers that it's called. I've redacted those because it's just a Firefox relay number and I don't have it anymore. So I don't know. I don't want some random person getting calls after I do this presentation. And then, there's some information like the city that was phoned, that kind of thing. Now, the digits here don't have to be 4 digits. It could be whatever they put in, right? So you could ask them for their whole credit card number and just be like, hey, you're behind. You need to settle up your account. Please provide your credit card number now. The interesting thing about this is going to a third-party server, right? This server prox3.xyz has nothing to do with Twilio. So it's just Twilio's API is just doing what the XML instructions tell it to do. So I have some recordings, and I hope this will work well. I'm going to play them up to the microphone. So this is ideally, let me just make sure my sound is up. This is ideally how it should sound. Just bear with me.
Hello, Timothy Smithers. Your two-factor authentication code is 947580.
Okay, so that's what it should sound like. Now, what's the first thing any hacker is going to do when they get a hold of something like this? Anybody? We're going to troll our coworkers. So this is what I sent to one of my coworkers when we were testing this.
Hello, I've got a fever, and the only prescription is more cowbell.
Now, the important thing about that cowbell thing, I asked you to remember that earlier. That's their demo sample. I cut it short. It's 52 seconds long of just cowbell for some reason. So I would have rickrolled him, but when I heard the cowbell, I'm like, okay, he's old enough. He'll get this joke. If you mess up your XML, it's very helpful. It still calls someone, and it does this.
Hello, Timothy Smithers. We are sorry. An application error has occurred. Goodbye.
That's great, right? But what that's instructive is that's sort of like you can tell that the XML has been messed up in some way. You're missing a closing tag or something. It has to validate as actual XML. Now, and the other thing about that is you'll notice you heard that the voice switch, right? Show of hands, you heard that? Yes? Okay. Nod head. Yeah, that's also okay. So what you'll see here is I'm using Polly Joanna as the voice. You can play samples of that on Amazon's page. That's where Twilio pulls all that data from. It's just, I think it's a whisper model that's just that particular voice. That's because that's what that team was using. But the default voice is slightly different, and you heard the difference there. So if you ever get called like that, you can just go and listen to which automated voice they're using, figure it out, and then that makes your attacks a little more believable if it's the right voice, right? You won't get tripped up as much. Now, here's what it sounds like when everything is put together.
Hello, Timothy Smithers. Due to a security event, additional verification steps are needed. To verify you are the correct user, please provide the second set of 4 digits of the credit card number associated with your account, followed by the #
This is where I'm entering 1111 and hitting pound.
Thank you. Your 2-factor code is 001337.
Now, you'll notice it added a 0 there, right? The reason for that is just that this say is actually never being processed, because what's happened, and I didn't realize that when I threw that together initially, but the gather action, once you successfully gather, it sends you over to that other XML file, and that's how it handles everything from that point on. So that's great. We got a cool new phishing avenue, and I can attack anybody who uses your same service. Now, this isn't a vulnerability in Twilio, right? Like, show of hands, who thinks this is a problem with Twilio? We have 1 vote. You're kind of right. It's not really Twilio's vulnerability. The vulnerability is an injection in an API I'm offering, or an application I'm building. But there's a couple of weaknesses here that are pretty big. Does anybody think that they have an idea on like what the security weaknesses I would harp on, or like you might consider a problem? Sure.
Maybe they could like restrict exactly what XML is like allowed to do, like a function that does that with any given XML that you offer. Like, oh, you're only allowed to redirect to X or Y address or something, like limiting the capabilities.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's like, that would be, so for those familiar, we have CWEs. CWE stands for Common Weaknesses Enumeration. It's meant to talk about weaknesses in software. So when you have like weak cryptographic keys or things like that, you're using broken cipher suites, that kind of thing. Those can be vulnerabilities, but a lot of the time, especially with crypto stuff, it's hard to exploit them. You'd need to be like a government entity. But with something like that, where it's, why can I exploit this? Why can I just tell it to redirect to my own server, right? There's kind of a weakness there. Now, the tricky part here is, as someone who's researched this a bunch, because part of my job is not just to break software. I have to help the developers understand like what the proper fixes are, what security controls they can put in place. We do threat modeling, that kind of thing. So a big part of my research for this was trying to find anywhere if there was a way to lock this down. And I'll always add the caveat that like maybe there's some weird obscure option. From what I can tell, there is not. There is not a way for you as the customer, the person who's like consuming the Twilio API, to go in and say, restrict it to these hosts. Like, you shouldn't be asking the random broad internet for access to this kind of thing, to be able to hijack or load call instructions from, that kind of thing. There should be an additional control there that's missing. The other additional failure here, and I'm going to call it that, is way back at the start. Right? If this code uses the proper way to do it out of the box, that software developer never makes this mistake in the first place. And so this is why I wanted to encourage everybody, like, think about when you're documenting your APIs, you should really walk away with the idea of like, is there a quick and dirty way to do it? And is there a safe way? And if so, what am I telling people to use? And I get sometimes security controls can be a pain. Like, I know, I have lots of conversations with teams that are like, do you have any idea how much it's going to cost us in time and money to do this? And sometimes you have to do a value calculation. But if you're providing a service to other companies or individuals or whatever it is, you should probably document it well, at the very least, right? That's an easy solve. Yeah, you can do it the wrong way, but then you as the person publishing the API, you can just say, well, guys, like, it wasn't even in a hardening guide. This was just the default documentation, and you've gone sideways from that. So I consider those to be the two sort of big weaknesses. Now, important, there are a lot of companies that offer this service. I didn't want to just pick on Twilio. So I looked at a lot of competitors of Twilio to see if they had similar functionality, if they implemented something different. As far as I can tell, Azure and AWS, I kind of looked into. They offer similar things, but A, they're very expensive compared to some of their competitors from what I saw. And B, they do things completely differently. That's sort of got to be its own area of research. A lot of other companies want to be similar or exactly replicate Twilio so that you can grease the wheels on getting those people over. So Vonage has their own API for this kind of thing. Same thing here, this event URL, from what I was able to confirm in my testing, it will just talk to the random internet. I wasn't able to find a specific way to lock it down to a set of safe URLs. Same problem. Now, maybe it exists. I didn't dig super deep on these other ones. But again, it comes down to you feed the data unsafely, unsafe things will happen. So they probably look at this as a value calculation of like, well, we could add that feature, but why when it's your fault, right? And isn't it amazing how many things are our fault these days? So there's also bandwidth, Telnix, and CarrierX here. They just straight up allow you to send Twilio TwyML to them. They even down to the redirect function. And as near as I could tell, same thing. No protections there. Some of them even make the same mistake in the documentation. It's probably, yeah, it's impossible to see on this screen right now. But they're literally using print response, and then they're like, this is the XML. It's the same thing, print response redirect. It's the same as TwyML. So they're even making the same sort of mistake there. Yeah. There's another popular one called Cinch. They use YAML, and it's not as simple and straightforward. I actually kind of like their approach a little bit more. You have to pre-configure things. So you have to create objects and use object ID references and stuff. It would be a lot harder for an attacker to guess anything like that. So it'd be much more difficult. You can't just redirect in this. So you have to have access to their console to create sort of an instruction listing, or I can't remember what their specific parlance for it was. But basically it's like, here's a valid instruction. It's at this URL. I think you can even cert pin it or something. So it's possible, I think, like, given enough time, you could probably make it happen. But really, it is that thing of these kinds of security controls are pretty easy to implement, right? Like implementing something where you detect a redirect is happening, and before your code goes and just loads the random URL you've been given, run it past an allow list that's configured per the client. That's not a hard, like there are so many places where you can do things like that already. I guarantee if you have an API like this, you already have either a NoSQL object or a database table somewhere called settings that's like key value, and the value is a blob for some reason. Seen that a lot. And you have a way to flexibly store this kind of stuff. So yeah. So then we'll talk about the impact of this beyond the obvious, right? Like obviously I could phish any of your users. Who here is familiar with how easy it is to spoof a phone number? One person. So it's very easy to spoof a phone number these days. Okay, sorry, two people. But the thing is, companies are working on, like phone companies, telcos across the world are working on trying to make it so that you can't spoof numbers that are sort of like outside your country, and they're trying to sort of lock that system down. So eventually, if that becomes reality, which I'm a pessimist, I don't think it will be, but but if it did, if somehow that system were made secure and you could start to actually trust the number you see on your phone, this is coming from like inside the house, right? Like this is coming from the legitimate number that you're used to getting calls from, potentially. The other thing is a lot of these support DTMF. DTMF is a sort of phone standard way of translating a character code sequence into phone functionality. So if you've ever heard about phreaking in the olden days of like you'd blow a whistle at a specific frequency and you'd get free payphone use, that kind of thing. That's all done because there's some additional control codes in the phone systems sort of behind the scenes that you're not hearing or seeing normally. DTMF allows you to access some of that. It also allows you to do things like plug in weights and things like that. So I thought the funnest thing would be to have one IVR talk to another IVR. Just have them infinitely loop through the instructions you're processing and eat up, denial of wallet, right? That idea of like, what happens if you get your bill at the end of the month and you've spent 80 grand when you expected to spend $80, right? That's not good. And then, it's that thing of, you can mess with your friends with this. That's always fun. I don't know. That's usually my go-to when we find stuff like this, is just to harass my teammates. So what I'll say is like, it's just a basic injection. At the end of the day, you're just injecting XML. It's not really all that different than SQL injection, right? You're attacking a downstream service. But what you can do with that service is kind of funny and cool. And it's also like, being able to call someone and play cowbell at them for 52 seconds is top notch. So the demo site and everything is available here on Codeberg. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask about this? Yes, sir.
Have you looked at bug bounty programs or anything like that for people who are using Twilio like this for?
So for the benefit of YouTube, the question was, have I looked at bug bounty programs for people who consume Twilio to see if this vulnerability is out there? The answer to that question is, I'm in an awkward situation because I work as a pen tester during the daytime. I would feel more obligated to not go through bug bounty programs, but do direct reporting. Now, what's interesting is Twilio does not have, this is another thing, I'm going to soapbox about it for a second since you asked the question. Who here has heard of security TXT? Okay, for those of you who haven't, here I'm going to explain why it's important. So as a pen tester, if you're going out there and you're trying to look at an application, even if it's just something you come across by accident, you should have, there's a standard called security TXT. I think the site is just securitytxt.org. It's very similar to sort of the way Google has implemented some authentication. You know how robots.txt works, things like that. You just stick it off the root of your website at .wellknown/security.txt. And what you do in there is you put in instructions for how you want to be contacted about security issues that people find about your stuff, because most companies don't have that. There is not like an easy way. So while I was researching this, I kind of had the thought of like, I might get up and present this at a conference. I think it's worth talking about, API security. Plus, it's fun to do anything remotely related to phreaking in 2024 because it's such a dead art. And it's how I started out messing with phone systems. So, I reached out to Twilio through various channels. Their explanation was log a bug bounty finding, which I had to then go and create. I can't remember if they were Bugcrowd or one of those. I had to go create an account and then submit it. And then I was at the end, I was like, look, I realize you're going to say no. You're going to reject this. Can you just have your security team talk to me? Nothing. They just rejected it and then moved on with their lives. So, so their official answer was to reject me on that. In terms of, so this is where a question like that, I don't feel it's appropriate to put that through the bug bounty program, because it's right to reject it. It's not really a vulnerability in Twilio per se. There's a missing security control, but they're not going to give points to a hacker for being like, you could do it better. So I really think and they don't have a security TXT file. So there's no way. I was looking people up on LinkedIn to see if I could reach out to them and be like, are you okay with me talking about this? Do you want to have any input here? No? Okay. And I got nowhere with it. So it shouldn't, a security researcher should not have to go to LinkedIn and try and find somebody at your in your CISO or, whatever to try and report issues. You had a question, Gareth?
Did you try sending cowbells to their end group?
I did think about, could I abuse this issue and then just send them, but then it's linked to my account. So I was like, well, they'll know who it is real quick. I didn't think they'd go for that. Yes.
So you can't really control those things where they just keep it as blob or whatever they want, right? When you utilize these APIs and take the values and use them, I have some ideas on how to sanitize them, but from your standpoint, how do you recommend us sanitize these parameters?
Okay, so for the benefit of the online audience, the question was, when we're dealing with all these third-party APIs, and they're very, very popular to use for all kinds of things, what do I recommend as an approach to sanitizing them? So my answer to that would be, you already have to figure out a lot about developing with one of those, with a third party, right? You have to figure out their sort of specific, even basic stuff like phraseology and things like that. So you're already doing the work of investing a little bit to partner with them, even if it seems minimal because you're just sticking a junior developer on it, which is, a lot what happens. But that person should invest the time in looking at whether they do things securely, right? Like the example I give right away is that Twilio does this correctly elsewhere in their documentation. So had the developer who had done the original demo looked at that and said, oh, there's a better way to do this, I'll do it that way. But another part of it is also the knowing. So part of what we do in our threat modeling work is we work with teams to try and really hammer home how important it is that the earlier you get a security concept in the cycle, the more headaches it saves everyone. Forget the dollar amount, because most employees don't necessarily care about that, I don't think. But it's the headaches of, oh, I got to drop everything and work on this stupid thing because someone didn't do something right 7 months ago and now it's my problem. And just the problem is there isn't a silver bullet answer to that, because every API is a little bit different, right? Injecting XML or JSON is very easy, but sanitizing the data before you put it in is very specific to the scenario, right? There's not one overall, OWASP has a project called HTML Sanitizer, which could be used in this case because HTML and XML are so close, but it wouldn't work for something for JSON, right? So it's all highly dependent on what the third party talks, whether they do it correctly in their library, that kind of thing. Yes.
So I'm not really understanding why it's not a Twilio problem.
Okay.
Why it's not a vulnerability? Because the way I'm understanding it is TwyML is an XML variant that Twilio created, right?
Yes. Yeah. So just to illustrate why this is why this isn't really their problem, just to clarify, this code, right, which is where the vulnerability exists here in the full name field, that code is my code. I wrote the code. They don't necessarily want you to do it this way. They have some examples that tell you to do it this way, but it's not necessarily their problem. The problems are their documentation is weak, and even they don't have any controls over what URLs you can send applications to. So this is well, yeah, of course, if you let anybody just put whatever XML they want and send it to our API, yeah, you're going to have a bad time and we're going to send you a bill for it. So that's why I don't consider the vulnerability itself to be Twilio's. It is, however, very easy to make that mistake given this, right?
They couldn't have created an API that was resilient to something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If this TwyML equals line here didn't exist, if you had to use this method of entering everything in, it would be fine. Unless there's a problem in how they're doing the encoding. That's more of their problem though, at least.
That's what you said, kind of.
Yeah. But it is that security control of being able to load any resource off the internet and treat that as the instructions. That's missing. That's their problem, in my view. Any other questions?
With the way the APIs, it's more of a trust thing, right? So aside from these SaaS companies, the open APIs and the public APIs that we use with other companies, it's only, the access is only given to certain group of people and certain kind of people. And they also have the other layers of trainings and everything. So there is a false sense of security and trust.
Yes.
Companies about their users. And there is also a false sense of liability. And who's liable? So they could say it's a feature, not a bug, right?
I'm pretty sure. So the question or the point was sort of raised that, like, some of this is based on access control on the company side, on the third party APIs side, and limitations around that would impose. And then the other side of it is that who's liable. The tricky part is, I bet you it's in every contract with them that you're liable at all times. So that's a liability is a whole other. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to get into that. But
what I'm saying is, because of these different layers of social securities implemented, and the people that are managing those things, they think they can get away with.
Yeah, it's very much like they don't need to care about it, right? So yeah, that's generally true. Yeah. So I think Cory Doctorow's got a book about that.
Also, the cynical view is if they give you the ability to shoot yourself in the foot with a bazooka, they make more money off that, and then you fix it the month afterwards.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. As you can tell, I'm jaded from many years in tech. It's very much true. Any other questions? Yes.
That's why that whole doctrine of secure by design is starting to come out, right? And that's why every CISO is shaking in the boots, is that liability is potentially being there is that line is being debated where the liability lies. The ultimate fix for this would be they should provide you with a SaaS tool or a SaaS mechanism to check what you're actually doing when you're consuming their APIs. And if you're using insecure call to their API, that should have been flagged up, right?
Oh, absolutely. So actually, to that point, another possible security control here that they could have picked up on is, hey, this customer whose account has never reached out to a third-party server and has always used resources loaded internally is suddenly talking to this external web server. Maybe we should give them a call, or maybe we should flag something on their account and block those requests. I'm willing to bet that monitoring doesn't exist, because I'm willing to bet that this was created in a time before that existed at all. But yeah, there are even other controls, like SOC-based controls could detect something like this, right? So it's yeah. I don't know. Was there another question somewhere? Yes.
Online, we have the question: when considering complex permission models, have you found that GraphQL implementation are more problematic than REST APIs? Or
yes and no. So it's tough because it's a little bit like GraphQL is, in my experience, a bit of a mess, but it's at least a mess that a lot of people are seeing and trying to do something about. Individual REST APIs, that's as much or more of a crapshoot. You could have a really good developer who knows their stuff and just implements everything well. And then you could have on a different developer, even on the same team, implement a different part of the API, and everything falls off. It's vulnerable to whatever you want. So I don't think you can say one way or another. I just dislike GraphQL because it's almost universally too heavy for anything anybody needs. But that's me. I'm going to get a lot of hate from that, especially in the HomeLab community. They love GraphQL. So any other questions? Okay, I'm going to educate everybody about CyberSCI now. This is the second half of the talk. So CyberSCI is a Canada-wide university-level cybersecurity challenge. I have volunteered with them for the past 4.5, 5 years, doing challenge development, so building CTF challenges for students to participate in. It's kind of fun. It's kind of cool. If you know any university students or are one, and you're interested in cybersecurity, you should talk to your local school InfoSec club, your local school computer sciences curriculum. You could even put together a club yourself if you want. We had something like 390 students across the country participate in the fall of last year. And then we brought the winning teams to Ottawa earlier in, I believe it was June. And so for them, they won their particular region. They get to come compete in Ottawa. The winners there then go on to represent Canada at 2 different international competitions, the ICC Cyber Challenge, I think it's IC3 or something. And then ECSC, which is a European cybersecurity challenge, and we're an invited country. So they get to go and they get to compete against teams around the world. Just to brag, we beat the US a few times. It's great. Go us. So yeah, if you know anybody who's sort of that age and interested in cybersecurity and wants to get into hacking or anything like that, send them this way. Even if they don't succeed, we try and give a lot of community support to that cohort of students so that they have things like, we have demo nights, or we have people who are expert CTF players. They'll do a Wednesday here or something like that to try and help train sort of the next generation of people. I'm actually stepping away from my role as sort of director of challenge operations because I have some own personal concerns. So, but no, it's great. And if you're interested in volunteering, talk to me. Either I'm Phoenix on Slack, or talk to me here, and I'll get you in touch with the right people. But yeah, thumbs up for me. Does anybody have any other questions about my talk? I know I just sort of jumped over there.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there a tool to validate your JSON, the payload for your REST API? Is there a tool to do that?
Is there a tool to? Sorry, I missed the middle part.
To validate the response for your API.
Oh, to validate the end response. Yeah, so you could. It wouldn't be hard to. You could even do that with regex. It'd be annoying, but you could do it with regex to say like, if this request we're about to send deviates from what we expect from this regex, you just have to detect character. The tricky part with that is like, you're effectively trying to block out specific characters, and that can always be a problem, especially because depending on how well your regex skills are, you've introduced a second problem, which is that you have a regex no one can recognize. So, but yeah, you could do something of like, parse this out. Does this make sense? Is it trying to load a third-party site? You could do some very silly detection on it. The tricky part there is, what if you are using that feature legitimately, right? Redirect doesn't have to be dangerous. It could be legitimate, right? In theory, I could just say like, answer this call. So the other part of this is that this same XML process you can use to define what happens when someone calls into a number. So when you're dealing with, you can write an entire like automated phone system using this. And one of the ways they encourage you to do it is to build them out as modules. So you think of, let's say you're calling, I don't know, your bank. You want to talk to someone in the, like one of the tellers. You want to talk to someone in mortgages, someone in investments, general inquiry, whatever. So the idea there would be you might even have different people responsible for that entire phone system mechanism. So you would just redirect to say, oh, you want to talk to a mortgage person? And then it bounces you to this other set of rules. So because there are legitimate use cases, it's not necessarily as simple as like filtering out URLs, right? If you're in that case, sure. But yeah.
It's better to detect and address these problems at the variable level rather than JSON object level.
Oh yeah, for sure. You should be whenever you're sanitizing data, you should do it before it goes into whatever its final resting place is. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, I was thinking like, do you then, would you say then like we should like try to create like a hardened version of these like Twilio MLs or something like that, like have like a hardened library that like allows you to say like parse these like variable XML like DSLs that only allow like certain data in the XML, like certain
yeah. So there, another way you could take this is well, what if you don't allow it to redirect or do anything by default to a third-party site without ticking a box on your account somewhere, right?
Addresses.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a missing security control. It depends on how granular you want to get with it. Yeah, you could absolutely make it as fine-grained as this tag should not be able to redirect to other sites. This tag can, but only these sites. This tag can redirect wherever because we want to rickroll everybody who calls us or something, you know? Yeah, I mean, there's many ways to sort of to tackle that problem. And I think the tricky part is like none of them are in place right now. So any other questions?
It's kind of crazy though, because if it's a phone service and like you could really scam a lot of people with that.
This is why I'm presenting it. Yeah, so that was my big concern when I saw this. I mean, beyond trolling my coworkers by playing cowbells at them, it was like that was the sort of demo we presented to the team was something that sounded very official, but in their case, we were able to enter more data into the fields we had control over. So it sounded a little bit more official. It matched all of their voices and everything like that. And they were shocked. Like when we played the clips for them, they were just like, whoa, we didn't know you could do that. Like how did that work? And then they were kind of like, well, this must be their fault. And I was like, no, it's yours, but you know, but here's how to fix it. And, you know, you didn't know, it's not, no one's mad or anything like that. But yeah. Yes, the opportunity for phishing is top notch. All right. I think that's I'm getting a hook in a second. So.
Is there any questions? If not, but we've got time. Relax.
Anyone want to hear a hot take on AI? No. Just start a fight in the room.
Is you get Taylor Swift's voice to call everybody to vote for Trump. That's what.
There you go. Yeah.
Is that too soon?
Trump's already doing that.
Yeah, that's
with an image. You know, this is. Yeah.
All right.
Vote together. Hey, they could have an AI feature.
I'm not going to talk more about this.
That's what I'm saying.
But yes, they could, and yeah.
Twilio, I think, has AI stuff that they added. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I didn't want to get into that because I was like, we could be here for 3 hours if I start ranting about AI. So,
My microwave has AI.
Pardon?
I think my microwave has AI at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm pretty sure your fish is cooked. It looks raw to me, microwave. What are you doing?
No, it just hallucinates the meal. It's not even in there.
Yeah. It just dings at 3 a.m. when no one's using it. Yeah.
Next time it'll be a cowbell.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.